Ladies and gentlemen, this is part 3 of this series with Dr. Robert McNair Price and Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald. I hope you guys like this. I hope you enjoy this content. Become a Patreon member. Help us support this channel, and we will continue to bring great content just like this.
Derek, I saw you. Do you want to jump in?
This is exactly what I was hoping for. I'm glad you guys are you're two scholars, right? So I know you guys are going to address scholarship and address things that you know from people, what they've said and issues with that. One of the things, if you don't mind, Dr. Price, I'm going to throw it to you. Let's pitch stuff at Dr. MacDonald about his works in Luke and Virgil and, of course, the Dionysian Gospel that you thought were fascinating, and then get comments back and forth of mimesis examples. So our audience is going, hold on, for example, using the Dionysian Gospel, Dionysus and Jesus both have this special connection with their father. The mother of Dionysus, Semele, if I'm not mistaken, dies, of course, and it's the father that gives birth to, or has Dionysus sewn into his side, Zeus, and gives birth to him. Whereas this is the only begotten of the Father here of Jesus. It's why is this even a thing here? It seems to fit this narrative of this God. And then you've said some interesting things like Tantalus, this idea of the water being right up to his chin in this lake. He can't just drink the water. It's like Lazarus in this parable where he's thirsting. Just touch your finger on water and just touch. I want those, if you can, go into those examples, and I'll let you, Dr. Price, point out some of them, and then have Dr. MacDonald, lead with these back and forth, if you don't mind.
Well, one thing slightly different, but I think in the same vein, you mentioned Achilles Tatius. What do you think? What about the possible influence of the Hellenistic romances on the gospel story at any point? The seeming death in Kyrios and his what is it? I'm getting the three names mixed up. Kyrios, and Callirrhoe, I think it is. The fiance is knocked out. She's in a coma. She's buried. Tomb raiders, tomb robbers see the tomb of the rich person and say, okay, there's got to be goodies in there. Let's go raid the place. And then when they get in there, oh my God, she's alive. What are we going to do? Can't leave a witness. And so they kidnap her. Next day, the husband comes in and he says he sees the garment laid out but no body, and he says, oh no, the gods envied me and she's ascended to heaven. It's almost like in The Life of Brian. Oh no, there he is. They find out that the body's been stolen or she's been kidnapped, and in the course of trying to find her, he gets crucified but survives it. And then there's a reunion scene where the bride and groom say, I thought sure you were dead. Is it really you? I mean, this is so similar. I know some have suggested this borrows from the Gospels, but I can't help thinking that it's the reverse, that novels, they were current for a long time, and at least 3 we know of had this kind of sequence. Do you think there's any likelihood that the Greco-Roman novels influenced the gospel story at some stage?
Well, I'm going to evoke the memory of one of my best friends, Richard Purvo, who made arguments that were similar to that. And I'm going to basically say, no, I don't, but I'm going to give you some arguments for it and an alternative way to think about the parallels. One of the problems we have with the Greek novels is dating, as you know. Most of the Greek novels and Latin novels are late. And even Chariton is considered late by some. So the issue then wouldn't be direct mimesis. But it also is widely known that the origin of the Greek novel owes a great deal to Odysseus and of the Odyssey, that is the Homeric epic. Here you have a person who has adventures at sea. He's noble. He loves his family. He can't wait to get back. He has to be wise and violent in order to succeed. It ends with them in bed and with this romance. And the one can actually chart, as some have, the influence of Homer on the Greek romances and to some of the Latin romances too, like Peleus's Golden Ass. So I think what we have in the Gospels is an analogous Homeric imitation that is employing some of the tropes of the Greek novel. But the Greek novels, for the most part, are not interested in crafting social identities for their readers. They're interested more in entertainment. And this is why Richard's book, one of his books, is called Prophet with Delight. It's to titillate. Yeah, it's to titillate and delight. It isn't to create foundation myth in the same way. I want to go back, though, to Derek's interest in having an example. And I'm going to take one from Luke and Virgil, and I'm going to build on something you said earlier about the influence of the Bacchae on Luke. Luke and Virgil is more about the Acts of the Apostles than it is actually about the Gospel of Luke. Although Derek mentioned the story of the visit to the netherworld in the Lazarus and Dives story, and we can talk about that. But you, just so that you and especially our viewers understand this, Paul begins his career as a theomachus, the word that is used in the Bacchae to describe Pentheus, who's the God fighter. And he goes with letters to arrest believers in Jesus the same way that soldiers do in the Bacchae to arrest the Maenads in the mountains who are worshiping Dionysus. In chapter 9, Paul gets a vision of the risen Jesus, very much like Dionysus, but Pentheus gets a vision of Dionysus. But unlike Pentheus, Paul converts. Later in chapter 16, Paul no longer is the theomachus, he's the theophilos. He's the God lover. He's the one who's in jail like Dionysus and has this marvelous prison break. That's in chapter 16. In chapter 17, Paul is a Socrates character. He's in Athens playing the role of a Platonic Socrates, talking about the unknown God. And from that point on, there's no reference to him as a Dionysus-like character, except in one of his trials, he actually quotes from the Bacchae. It's hard to kick against the goads, which is what Dionysus had told Pentheus. So one has this move from the Dionysian to the Apollonian, to use Nietzsche's categories. He starts out as a character like Pentheus. He becomes a character like Dionysus. He ends his career as a Socrates, and he is unjustly executed after the Acts of the Apostles. This is one of the beautiful literary strategies that we have in Luke Acts. And actually, you have a similar strategy in the gospel. His trial before Pilate is different from the synoptics and resembles the trial of Socrates, who likewise is accused of introducing a new god and disorder and messing up the laws of Athens. Those are the charges that Luke adds to Jesus's trial in the gospel. But before that, you find certain elements that may involve the Bacchae. My favorite is Zacchaeus, who is up in a tree, and Jesus spots him, and he comes down, and his whole family is saved. Pentheus is up in a tree spotting the Maenads. The Maenads see him, they bring him down, and they kill him. And Odysseus banishes his family from Thebes. So you get all of these wonderful, playful, remythologizing stories, more in the Acts of the Apostles than in the Gospel. But you adroitly noted the Bacchae stuff in the Acts of the Apostles long before you read Luke and Virgil. So some of the, by the way, I am a pioneer in mimesis criticism. I'm willing to own that, but I'm not the first person to have seen these parallels. And occasionally in the history of scholarship, you get nods to classical Greek poetry, often the Bacchae, less often to Homer, but by scholars. So it's as if the camel's nose got under the tent, but the camel wasn't allowed in. So I think I'm allowing the camel in, or at least I hope I am.
Oh yeah. Are there any criticisms of your work on this that need to be taken seriously, that have given you second thought?
Yes. First of all, I think the major response of biblical scholars to my work is to ignore it. And there's no way you can answer someone's ignoring your work. And you know that yourself with your work.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that's the one I can't handle. The another is the argument, which has some validity, that maybe these authors don't know Homer directly, but maybe they know Homer through anthologies or other imitations. A good example would be in the Acts of the Apostles, we have a magnificent shipwreck story in chapter 27. And I compare it with the shipwreck in Odyssey 5, which was in fact the model that was used in schools for people who were to have a shipwreck story. But because of that, there are lots of shipwreck stories in antiquity, including in the Greek novels that you mentioned, but also in Virgil's Aeneid. The Aeneid begins with a shipwreck that's modeled after Odyssey 5. So why should I think that Acts 27 is a direct imitation of Odyssey 5 when it could be an imitation of other imitations? Now, then that really gets us into the weeds that we don't want to get into. That is comparing the Greek language, the sequence of motifs, and so on. So I still hold that it comes from the Odyssey, but acknowledge that it's possible for have imitations of intermediary text. In some of them could be mediated from Judaism, and because we have Jewish imitations of the Bacchae and Homer as well. Obviously, in Josephus, there are a few. So I think that's a legitimate. The one that I have addressed over and over again, but is the one that recurs, is that the gospel authors were not sufficiently sophisticated, and surely the argument is, surely their readers were not sufficiently sophisticated to see all of these parallels that this Harvard-educated scholar bum, Dennis MacDonald, sees. And my argument is that Homer was everywhere. It was, yes, better known by the elites, obviously, but people were quoting Homer in the streets. We have graffiti that are Homeric lines and Virgilian lines. These stories are visual in their art and in their poetry, in their temples. The Homeric deities are still worshipped and believed in during the time of the New Testament. As Hegel put it, Homer was the oxygen the Greeks breathed. So we don't have to be talking about cultural elites only, that this stuff was in the culture. The other thing I would say is that, in my view, all of the synoptic evangelists and the Johannine evangelists were, for their time, intellectuals. They were cultural elites, as the Greeks would talk about them, the epipedevmeni. And the fact that they could read Greek and compose with that ability means that they were exposed to Homer in schools. He was the core curriculum in literary education. And about that, there's no doubt. But I think, Bob, we have dumbed down the authors of the Gospels and their readers. And we do so because of a kind of modern cultural post-Enlightenment arrogance. And in many cases, I think they were more astute, certainly more astute to their culture than we are. And that we are the ones who have to learn from them instead of us informing them about. And this is, by the way, one of the big mistakes Bultmann made. I think Bultmann really helped to dumb down gospel composition. And so I'm really not much of a fan of form criticism for that reason.
Well, it's occurred to me, and I wonder what you think of this. Is it possible that some of the stuff was orally transmitted, but that it was among lay Christians, if you want to call them that, who were familiar with the Homeric stuff, and that it wasn't necessarily always the final gospel writers? It may have had a Homeric tinge, at least from some time back. If one thought, I'm rethinking the whole oral tradition thing. That's almost an apologetic, trying to come up with a plausible bridge between the historical Jesus and the Gospels, and that I think is perhaps an ad hoc approach. But if there was an oral tradition, could it already have been influenced by Homer and Euripides, who were widely known, etc.?
Well, I think that's right, and that one can't omit that altogether. I have no doubt that in Pauline circles, people talked about the circumstances of Jesus's death, the crucifixion. People talked to each other. They told narratives and stories. My problem is as a methodological skeptic. At this point, I don't think we have the scholarly tools to be able to peer behind the clever compositions of these Gospels, in which the Homeric stuff is strategic, to identify how much of that could have come from moral performance, though I'm not excluding it.
Well, one example might be the parable of the wicked tenants, which seems to me, as I believe you said, begin to forget, that seems to be based on the Penelope's suitors story, but then that story in the Odyssey also has to do with the Jesus story rather than just a story told by Jesus. If it's used twice, well, kind of like the Bacchae is used twice in Acts as the story of Paul's conversion vision, and later Paul as Dionysus, like you're describing, I begin to wonder, is this a kind of based on a doublet in the previous lore? It needn't be, though. I mean, you can certainly make use of the same thing in different contexts in original composition. So, if there was, Go ahead.
No, I just confess to being a form critical skeptic. And if we had tools for monitoring oral tradition, I'd be happy to know what they are. I actually wrote a book called The Legend and the Apostle, in which I use form, and I use folkloristics as a way of trying to monitor the shape of the Pauline legacy. And I think there you did have oral tradition. Yes, early Christians spoke to each other. They surely narrated things that were meaningful to them. How much of those narratives someone like Paul would have known is impossible to say. So I just become a skeptic. I know that, and by the way, I intuit this in what you say. You think too that oral appeals to oral tradition can be promiscuous and not scientific. And until we have better, and by the way, criteria that are often used for monitoring oral tradition to me fail. And I feel much more confident about dealing with literature than I do about hypothesizing oral stages. That's all.
Yeah, there's certainly room for that, because it's what else can it ever be but speculative, which isn't a cuss word for me.
No, it isn't. Yeah,
it does indicate the necessary tentativeness of any theory built on that.
I have a question for you, Bob. I see some of the things you've done, both in writing and in MythVision, a kind of joy in going to other people's religious playgrounds and destroying the toys, and being happy to kind of leave some desolation behind, and then have your own hypotheses, in some cases with the same problem, advancing 2 or 3 different alternative solutions. And I confess to be a little more cautious, I think, than destroying other people's toys in the playground. Maybe that's unfair to you, but I thought I'd at least give you a chance to refute it.
What's an example? Do you mean a particular argument, a particular position?
Well, I'll give you an example. So you did an interview with MythVision on the Paul's statement that 500 people saw him at once. And that's a tricky one. And it's one that I would have my own read on. But and it's one of, as you know, that Christian apologists lean on heavily to show that Jesus was raised from the dead and so on, which I find just to be a fatuous argument right from the start. But so at one point you said, well, it could be a creedal formulation. And another would be, well, maybe there was an oral tradition about it and so on. And I wasn't quite sure how what your own solution was going to be to that, and we all have to fish around sometime to get alternative explanations. So I don't want to be dogmatic about it, but is that a fair observation?
What's the punchline of it in cases like that? Do I dogmatize like the people I'm criticizing, or I'm not quite sure?
Okay, this is not a criticism. That I think my experience with a couple of these was that you are generous in giving to your viewer alternative ways of thinking about things other than the Christian apologetic mode. So I think you advance several different possibilities of alternative ways of understanding. And I think that, so I actually am trying to be generous to you. I think that you are generous to the viewer by saying, here are some alternative ways of viewing it, but it's a good question or something like that.
Oh, yeah, because I realize you can't be definitive, for instance, about that. So I know Duncan Derrett appealed to a Buddhist parallel loose in some ways, but kind of striking anyhow, that the ground opened up and 500 Buddhas and Bodhisattvas appeared to attest to what the Buddha was saying. Could be, and he linked it with the return of the dead in Matthew and all that. It's kind of interesting. Could be, for all I know. So I figure people ought to know about that. I mentioned Steve Patterson's idea. It may not have been original with him. I don't know. That this is a garbled version of the day of Pentecost. That especially in Greek, the idea of the 500 brethren and Pentecost, somebody could have made a mistake about that and reinterpreted it accidentally. Well, I don't know that didn't happen. It's worth considering.
You could also add Romulus, who has an ascension right in the front of his army, and then appears to one of his soldiers afterwards, and takes it to the Senate, and everybody says, "Oh yeah, Romulus must have ascended." Not to the Senate, but to no, it was the Senate, and they pronounce him to have been ascended, and so on. So you have lots of history of religions parallels. No, I just
and my favorite is the Acts of Pilate, where we hear that 500 soldiers were the guards placed at the tomb of Jesus, and that they were, after they gave account for themselves, they were sent up to Galilee, where Jesus was reported to have been seen, and they got there just in time to see the ascension, even though that wasn't in Galilee, but what the heck. And they report about this to Pilate. There are 500 of them who saw the risen Jesus, and this doesn't appear in any gospel. It's got to be a later work, and I suggested that it's an interpolation into an interpolation, that it's part of this creed, like Harnack said, that it was several things sandwiched together later, and that this must have been the latest of all, or surely we would see it in some gospel. And somebody said, well, yeah, how about Nicodemus? Because it was too late maybe to add to the others. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's the best, but who knows if it's true.
Yeah. Well, the text you're talking about sometimes is called the Acts of Pilate, sometimes the Gospel of Nicodemus, which I think is closer to its original title. But in my synopsis, I have an appendix on imitations of the Bacchae in the Gospel of Nicodemus when it rewrites the Gospel of John. So here we have a late 4th century reader of the Gospel of John who sees the Dionysian stuff, just the way Nonus of Panopoulos did. So this is, I hope your readers know how much we enjoy fishing around these texts and imagining them, and the pain that we have that most people who say they love the Bible cannot fathom the creativity and the wonder and the diversity of these texts. It really is a tragedy.
Oh, that's the word. I knew you were going to say that. I have a book coming out pretty soon called When Gospels Collide, Contradictions as Revelations. And my point in it is fundamentalists are afraid to admit the existence of inconsistent narratives and all that, because they think that would mean that the gospel writers were a bunch of stupid incompetents. But no, in almost every case, you can see how there is an editorial or even theological agenda and harmonizing. There's a great cartoon in a book on The Bible Now I Get It by Gerhard Lofink, where he's got these great cartoons, and one of them has Noah with the animals coming off the ark, but they walk right into a huge meat grinder, and each animal is labeled with parable, aphorism, oracle, different genres, and when they come, the sausages come out of the meat grinder, it's biblical theology. And I think that's what they're doing. They're missing out on so much by not letting the writers have their say. And so I say, which is the best view? Which is the best approach to the Bible? One that creates problems or one that solves them? I'd rather go with the one that makes it intelligible, even if I don't quite know what to do with it, because there's nothing more pious than understanding the text. So I agree completely. And I draw the parallel to classicists. Imagine some neo-pagan movement comes about saying the Iliad and the Odyssey, the word is Zeus. You got to believe it. Homer said it. I believe it. That settles it. Classicists would go on the warpath, not because they hate the text, but because they love them and don't want to see them mistreated this way. And I said, that's the way it is with us.
2 points. One is a conversation I had with a good friend of mine who is a Jewish scholar who finds Christian apologists in his classroom, as we all have. And he said his challenge to these students was, why do you require consistency in the biblical record so you constantly have to explain away problems instead of seeing the diversity of these texts and seeing how wonderful they are? So why concentrate on the problems? Why not see the insight and the wisdom? But the other is, and this is related to it, Bob, I think, so many modern readers of the Bible require it to be true historically, instead of understanding its truths aesthetically. That these are beautiful texts. They speak to my heart. And I'm an atheist. And yes, I deal with the problems of the text all the time, because the problems allow one to see the brilliance of the authors. That Luke's view of Mark is not a fundamentalist view of Mark. He changes Mark on a routine basis, and he drops things that he thinks are wrong. And what we need to do, I think, is to have a more robust appreciation of early Christian narrative art. And the word mythology may not be the right word because of its associations with falsehoods, but myth is the way people express their truths. And myth is the way that the human imagination, like music, and I am a musician, like music captures the heart.
Gentlemen, I have to make a comment. This has been an unbelievable episode, by the way, and I want to do more with both of you. I couldn't look at myself on the screen while you two were talking. I said, hold on, let me back out. This is too good. 2 things real quick. Number one, it reminds me of Christine Hayes' debate I saw on YouTube. Professor Christine Hayes debated a rabbinic Jew, and they're arguing about the Talmud, or the debate is over the Talmud. How should we understand this thing? How should we read it? I mentioned this in Heretics Anonymous the other day with our good friends John and Max. They're both Christians, as well as your mother-in-law. And I thought to myself, you don't get to hijack spiritual experience. Okay. I'm an atheist, and you are trying to monopolize the text and say, nope, there's only one way to experience this thing, and mine's the true one. And I didn't mean in any disrespect, but what I said was, as Christine Hayes debated this Talmudic Jew, and the Jew said, you wanting to understand the who, what, when, where, why, how, all of that, it takes away the application and the meaning of the Talmud and what they meant, what they're trying to do to you. She got up and destroyed it. I hate to say, I'm not a fan of like choosing sides and debates for gladiatorial purposes. I do it to learn. And she said, the who, the what, the when, the why, the how, and what was the rabbi thinking, and why did he say that, and what was the point? She said, I get a religious experience out of that. And so she's not a religious person. We're not religious people. All three of us aren't religious, but we get an experience on uncovering and discovering the majesty of these authors and their intentions and their purpose and their world and what they're trying to say far deeper. And that's where the appreciation comes in and saying, fundamentalist, get your claws off of it. And not because we're trying to say, don't read your Bible, don't do this. We want you to see what we're saying the same way they want us to go. We want you to experience this. I experience what they experience in this magical feeling when I find out what you guys are talking about right now. When I appreciate the complexities and the contradictions and the nuance and that one-dimensional angle that fundamentalists bring in and, well, this has all got to fit together. Now help me put this puzzle together. Let's make sure it all fits. It's so ridiculous. It doesn't allow it to be, there's so much more depth is all I got to say. So I had to just jump in and say that.
You had a second point too, didn't you, Derek?
I felt like it was in there. I felt like,
okay.
I felt like there was two in that. I don't know why, but you guys did so good today, even in your disagreements. I really think I would like to see more of this if you guys would be interested in this. I think the audience is going to absolutely eat this up. And the material you guys discussed was, I felt like an airplane view. There was a couple trees we focused on, but we took an airplane view of the forest and getting to see, like, how are we going to, when we land this plane, how are we going to walk through the forest? How are we going to treat it? And you guys set the ground really well on this. So I want to say thank you to both of you.
No, thank you, Derek.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
Oh, thank you. Oh, Dionysus.
That's right. That's right. My name.
That is so true.
But of course, Dennis does come from Dionysus. But the reason I go with my initial R, it stands for Ronald McDonald.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you know what? You can keep on bringing the fast food and we're going to eat it up. You don't have to worry about anything, man. I'm serious, though. Dr. McDonald, like, your work combined with this conversation with the work that Dr. Price is doing, we're changing the game on YouTube. This is a whole different world that the Guild and critical scholarship and all these colleges, I don't think they're going to be able to keep up with what the media is trying to do here. I'm serious. Just like the Jehovah's Witnesses, they're stuck in a particular way in the particular medium and how they're going to try and keep things in order and whatnot. They're losing the fight. The Jehovah's Witness Church is losing the fight. Too many people are realizing that, and I'm not trying to knock religion. All right, I'm trying to knock high control cult-like situations and show you're not going to keep parents from being able to speak to their children if they leave Jehovah's Witnesses. And the media of YouTube and online is a medium that's helping people be exposed to these ideas. And many Jehovah's Witnesses during COVID, for example, had the time to go on with nothing else to do, click play on a video and went, oh my goodness, I experienced that. You know, and they were able to see things in a way that they were never able to see. So my point is, I want to keep this up. Ladies and gentlemen, go down in the description. You literally cannot pass up the opportunity of joining MythVision's Patreon. All this stuff is early. Even these videos that we're recording today with Dr. Josh, Dr. Josh, I record with Dr. Josh a lot, Dr. Robert M. Price and Dr. Dennis R. McDonald. Go check out Dr. Price's books. There's so many, you will never find them all, just so you know. Start somewhere. Holy Fable 1, those are biggies. There's tons of them. Make sure you check them out. And he has his website, which will link you to his Patreon, or you can donate if you want to help him out with the PayPal. Like I said, you guys want to get salvation, okay? He will literally make you all the wine you want when you go to heaven. What other gifts do you give? You're a donor deity, so make sure you join his Patreon, as well as Dennis R. McDonald has so many books, and he's still publishing. We got to have him come back on MythVision. Help support these guys. It makes them have a drive to say, Derek, when are we recording again? And it really gives them inspiration. It's not about the money. It's truly about the appreciation of the blood, sweat, and tears and the years of hard work that they put into this. You guys joining it, checking it, all of that. I'm telling you, that's what it's about for these guys. So would you like to make final comments, gentlemen?
Well, it seems to me you could view this as a sort of a revival of the Amos and Andy show. We could have biblical names and all. But I do have a comment. Dennis mentioned this really important book by Thomas S. Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, that explains the difficulty he and I are in being outsiders to the magisterium, as I call it, of the SBL and all of that. Kuhn argues that you've got an old guard that learned to play a particular game by certain rules, and when somebody comes up with a new paradigm, a new framework, and suggests that there's going to be a lot of initial skepticism, you really got to do a good job showing how your method makes better sense of the old evidence, but that's quite proper, because you wouldn't accept it yourself if you didn't subject it to rigorous examination. And so you want it to survive that. So your theory's got to run the gauntlet, go right ahead. And then eventually everybody may see it your way, or it may be that you just have to wait a long enough time for the old guard to all croak. But that eventually, like you stop mocking the continental drift theory and adopt it as the new orthodoxy. That's how it happens. There's this long period of argumentation and reorientation. So it would not surprise me to see our approaches eventually become mainstream, though I have to admit it doesn't matter to me. I mean, I wouldn't live to see it anyway, and I'm just into this because I find this fascinating. I don't really care what anybody else thinks. I'm not even trying to convert anybody to my views. I'm just trying to get people to think and come up with their own syntheses. Thomas Kuhn, he's an apostle.
Actually, I do want to convince people, and I want to change. And I guess my final word would be: this is not simply an arcane academic discussion between two aging scholars who, read the same things, know the same people, and it's just a tempest in a teapot. I think Derek is right in saying that the cultural and political implications of loosening up the misunderstanding of the New Testament and these Gospels and freeing Jesus from the manipulation of those who are in control of pulpits and so on is really an overdue and an important task. So this is not simply an arcane discussion. It actually should be a seismic movement culturally and politically to say that we need to have more intelligent discussions. We don't want fake news. We want to have scientific information and a much more compassionate and aesthetic interpretation of these really wonderful but abused texts.
I agree with all of that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this has been a fascinating show, and we're going to do follow-ups. I can bank on that. This has really been a marvelous discussion, having both scholars discuss their work with each other, take a few jabs at some ideas in particular as well. Let me know down in the comment section. Be sure to like this video. Be sure to share it out as far and as wide as you possibly can. I'm going to have to break this up into 3 sections because it was such a long episode that anyone who stuck through, I'm sure you picked up and learned a lot of information. Please help them out. Help them out making this endeavor possible and getting it out there by spreading it through social media. And ladies and gentlemen, congratulate these gentlemen for joining us on MythVision. Never forget, if you're wondering, you're looking for a donor deity and you want some blessings from heaven, you can always join MythVision. And then when you do, you're not just on the outside, you are MythVision.